Hi, everyone. It's so good to see so many people that I recognize, especially the presenters are all here. I'm glad about that. I'm carrying a phone because I have to time people, not because I'm going to make phone calls. So I would like to thank the instrumental organizations and individuals without whom this event would not have happened. First of all, the Chicago Architecture Biennial for their generosity in selecting ArchAgenda LLC as an affiliate program partner. Also, Neil Katz, if you would stand up, please. The reason Neil Katz is very special, he's a former colleague at SOM and Harrington College of Design. He's a member of the Chicago-based computational design group SOM Black Box, but he was also the person that helped me brainstorm this event. So thank you, Neil, and thank you everyone at SOM for being here. And most importantly, I want to thank our wonderful speakers who truly do not need an introduction, but I am going to introduce them, as global thought leaders and provocateurs. I would like to bring your attention to the back side of your program, so there were programs all over the seats. For the next exciting adventure that ArchAgenda is going to do, we are sponsoring a global competition to design Liberland, the 21st century micronation. Please visit the website and enter this exciting ideas competition, which we're also working very hard to make an actual built reality. This venue, the Gold Room, is notoriously known as the most haunted in Chicago. The hotel was built in 1893 for the Columbian Exposition and since has been sworn by many guests as being very haunted. This haunting is entirely appropriate for the ArchAgenda debates, since these guests are some of the most notorious voices haunting architecture today. And more viscerally for myself, their projects and practices have haunted my entire career in architecture. Obviously, they are very appreciated for that. Since I strongly feel that they need no extensive introduction, I will very briefly state the various roles that these globally celebrated architects play in the field of architecture, urbanism, and design, in the order in which they are presenting. They all share the commonality of being architects, theorists, and educators. Patrick Schumacher is a partner at Zaha Hadid Architects, where he has been since 1988. He is also the founding director of the Architectural Association's Design Research Laboratory, where he still teaches today among other prestigious schools all over the world. He has written the treatise, The Autopoiesis of Architecture, in 2 volumes, a most impressive feat in comprehensive unified theory. Peter Eisenman is the founder of Eisenman Architects and has been active in both practice and academia for 50 years. He's a professor at Yale, and he has taught at very notable institutions, including UIC, when I was a student, and he served as an honorary chair of the Department of Architecture. He's the author of Writing into the Void, Selected Writings from 1990 to 2004. Jeffrey Kipnis is an architectural critic, designer, filmmaker, curator, and theorist. He is the founder of the Architectural Association's Graduate Design Program and a professor at Knowlton School of Architecture at Ohio State University. He's the author of A Question of Qualities, Essays in Architecture. Renier de Graaf, whose name I've botched up just now, is a partner at the Office for Metropolitan Architecture, OMA, director of AMO, OMA's research and design counterpart, and co-author of the celebrated Roadmap 2050, a practical guide to a prosperous low-carbon Europe. Theodore Spiropoulos is the founding partner of Minima Forms, along with his brother Stephen, and the current director of the Architectural Association's Design Research Laboratory. He is the author of the innovative book, Adaptive Ecologies, Correlated Systems of Living. My own role in this event is as curator, talk show host, and moderator with a very light touch. I expect a lot of participation from everyone here, and these debates are for all of us a communication event. The event is being filmed, so no other film or audio is allowed, certainly no flash. The ArchAgenda debates will be held in 2 rounds. After each group speaks and delivers their individual 20-minute position papers, We will have a 1-hour public debate with audience participation, and I hope that you make my job easy by asking all the good questions. There will be one 15-minute intermission between sessions, and the event will end at 9:30, and we have 45 minutes leeway if we want to socialize with our guests. The issues that haunt architecture today span a huge gamut and stylistic identity. This is perhaps the most accelerated age in design, empowered by computation and global real-time communication, and yet we're all faced with far-reaching battles of ideas that are straining the continuous fabric of our discourse and practices in both fertile and unfertile directions. In the most general manner, the ArchAgenda debates aim to tease out these conflicts and actually work through them to the extent permitted by the brevity of this event, to inaugurate a new level of communication that may someday soon facilitate the movement towards a unified, coherent discourse. I now welcome our first speaker, Patrick Schumacher, who is perhaps the most outspoken proponent of this particular social function of architecture. Please help me welcome him.
Thank you, Daniela, and welcome everybody. So I will do a quite rapid staccato style presentation within 20 minutes, and then I'm sure you'll have a lot of time to pick apart some of these points and elaborate upon them. I think the ArchAgenda debates are hitting the nail on the where the task of trying to formulate, maybe through debates and collective discourse, where the discipline should be going, where it is, and where it might go, should go. And we don't get much help from this, just to let me preface this, from the Chicago Architecture Biennale, because I've just been to the exhibition yesterday and there was virtually next to nothing which I recognize as relevant contemporary architecture. So we have to fill that void here, perhaps. The state of the art of architecture, I think we're in an interesting position at the cusp of significant transformation of the global built environment. And so the future of the art of architecture looks bright. And I've currently editing a new issue of AD called Parametism 2.0, where it is just about trying to define that, trying to gather what is relevant with respect to the future of architecture. And some of the speakers are invited actually to contribute to this also. Before I go into the substantive arguments, I want to make a few meta-arguments about the imperative of convergence, the importance of these debates, because I believe that the discipline must strive to define and share, define a shared paradigm, its agenda, its direction, the way forward, and I think that's a singular way forward, because otherwise we would be standing in each other's way in the attempt to define the metropolis of the 21st century. So the purpose or end game of architectural discourse is consensus around a shared paradigm as a precondition of cooperative, cumulative progress towards a global best practice, so that simultaneous or sequential acts do not contravene each other. So there is an imperative of coherence, which implies the rejection of pluralism. So we can only accept pluralism as temporary historical condition during periods of crisis-induced paradigm shifts, and the last one was the 1980s, where that kind of pluralism was inevitable. And at that time, we had to reckon with the temporary divergences and temporary pluralism of directions, with the whole purpose of kind of sifting through, selecting out, and forging a way forward. So we have to reject the fatalistic acceptance of a pluralism of ineradicable or insurmountable condition of postmodernity, if you like. So I think we need to shift gear with respect to our discursive culture, and that was also a kind of quote of mine at the very beginning of the ArchAgenda provocation. I think we should kind of work from a benign intolerance, I would like to call it, as a discursive strategy and mechanism of convergence. So the principle of indiscriminate tolerance that makes sense only in a phase of post-crisis brainstorming, if it would be made permanent, and we are in the danger of doing that, ultimately denies the possibility of the comparative evaluation of positions, paradigms, and styles. So, and thus ultimately denies the discipline's rationality, denies the possibility of coherent progress. And so, but this is a historicizing argument. Discourse cultures are not absolute, but must be reflected and adjusted in line with historical junctures and tasks. So I believe we need to shift gear. I mean, it's in fact long overdue, and implement a shift also in the cast of characters, role models, ambitions, etc. So I'm announcing that the days of the iconoclast mavericks are over. And I'm not sure if some of the panel have to be classified in that category. I'll leave that for the further debate to unfold. So I believe that in order for the discipline to get a chance to once more effect a pervasive impact and transformation of the built environment, we must transform the discursive culture, as said, at this juncture, and increase the polemical force and insistence, both internally within parametrism and also externally, and weed out the ignorance which persists in the face of a, by now, I would argue, mature and compelling set of best practice principles. So, and therefore, we must vigorously challenge any self-indulgent withdrawal from critical debate in the name of artistic freedom, which we needed in the 80s, in fact, because at that time, modernism was bankrupt and there wasn't a clear way forward. We had to go through a draw-in philosophy and have a kind of very, very wide open debate. But that open debate, obviously, is the whole purpose of it to come to conclusions, to find a new way, and the new way has been found. And we're working on it cumulatively already for 15, 20 years. So we have been, I would argue, up to 2008, in a period of post-convergence, cumulative mature research and development under the auspices of parametric design, with an increasingly large-scale implementation of parametrism across all continents and program domains. And the work of Zaha Hadid exemplifies this, but this was going on until the Great Recession put the brakes on and diverted attentions and energies. And so we, to some extent, what happened, maybe it's inevitable, the politicization and the opening up of big questions once more, but I think that simultaneously we have to get back on track, and we need a new level of assertiveness, I believe. We need to win the arguments about how architecture can best contribute to societal progress. I mean, and parametrism has to win these arguments. I have to win this argument. We have to collectively address this, and that has not always been within the movement a priority, but in the current context must be a priority, and answers have been provided in the last years. So this assertiveness must be backed up by a compelling, substantive set of arguments. Basically, it requires a demonstration of parametricism's compelling superiority in terms of its life-enhancing advantages. It's kind of societal project, and we need to claim that from within parametricism. So what this also demands of us is a framing worldview. So we need architectural theory, and architecture, since the Renaissance, always was backed up and worked through this theory. But it also needs an architectural theory that is embedded within an up-to-date social science and theory of society. And there's a number of candidates we can look at and study, and architectural theorists, we don't expect this from every architect, but architectural theorists who make a claim for leading the discipline need to scan the social science and theory of society and make a bit, and I picked up Luhmann as one of a series of potential candidates for the state of the art of social science and theory. And in the conference 2 years ago, which the book is now out, I made the argument of the historical pertinence of parametricism and argued for a prospect of a free market urban order, which I will also go into in the next few minutes. So this is my position statement. I don't want to repeat it, and we have to really start very deeply at the fundamental issues. What is the built environment's contribution to society? What has it been? And I believe that social order required spatial order, that we have the built environment as the necessary material substrate of cultural and societal evolution. There is no society without built environment for a reason. It's basically becoming human through building up society and building up on a scale beyond the kind of flock of apes roaming through the forests. We need built environment as a substrate of cumulatively building up social structure, social order, embed and stabilize and evolve social institutions through spatial orders, morphologies, but also, as you can see here, with the semiological overlay. And that doesn't only include the built environment, it includes the whole world of artifacts and products, including the fashion system, the world of artifacts. All of that is a ordering stratum which evolves and builds up, and initially through trial and error. It's a kind of unreflected process of accumulating a social, societal systems. At this stage, for instance, the medieval feudal town. This spreads across the landscape as really a winning model. But then it evolves further, and we have the Big Bang of architecture, where there's an emergence of a new substance or substrate of architectural and therefore cultural societal evolution, where we have a reflective discourse, where we move from direct trial error out in the real world of construction into the domain of the drawing and discourse and argument, and that accelerates innovation, and that projects now in a series of much faster evolving trajectories back in a fast evolving society, because we also at the same time have political theory, we have the sciences and a theory of technologies. Everything becomes onto that new stratum of evolution, which is the writing discourse. And that I'm just moving through, and as you can see here, the Baroque is far more superior than the Renaissance in constructing larger integrated social wholes and make them legible and orient social actors within a much more complex and deep society. And moving on through neoclassical historicism into the modernist era, the mass industrial society, world society emerges, and it has again a new series of organizing principles, more differentiation, more degrees of freedom, the overcoming of, for instance, system and proportionality. But this too finds its limits and wasn't a big mistake. But it would have been a mistake to continue, because we're moving forward. We have the micro-technological revolution. We have a much more rich and diversified and dynamic societal environment, and we need to move from the left to the right. And that's the state as we are now. We have new degrees of freedom, and we have the answer to this new stage of civilization, which I call post-Philist network society, is parametricism, and it's not yet impacted. It's just a proposition, starts to be impacted in isolated cases, but we need to move forward and it become an all-encompassing model. And what we need to do is we need to realize that the architectural styles are epochal styles which align with socioeconomic epochs, and that the progression of styles has its raison d'etre in the process of societal and civilizatory progress and evolution, also in steps and stages, not as a kind of smooth continuation. And that's the condition where we are now. We all know, we feel it in our bones that we have to be in these mega cities. We have urban concentrations of an unprecedented scale, and we all need to be in these centers, and they become super dense and super complex, super rich, multi-audience, and that's what we need to address. The problem is, yes, this is much more superior to the kind of modernist, clean, separated city, but at the same time it has a problem. It is menacing visual chaos. There's nothing but ugliness. I would call it the garbage spill urbanization, which was happened since the 1970s, you can say, or 60s in fact. The 60s were the last beautiful urban districts, whether it's Brasilia or White Tel Aviv. So ever since we have only this kind of garbage spill ugliness. It is vital and intense. There's nothing else. It's been aestheticized in postmodernism and deconstructivism in particular. And now where will we go from there? We have these kind of amorphous spills, disfigured, disorienting, but intense and attracting. The only things which become legible and give shape and orientation is, in fact, the river. Some natural features, valleys, mountains. So I'm saying, let's run with that. That's an intuition to build on. So we can use the principles of nature of a lawful, rule-based structuration of a complex, variegated order of a highly differentiated, intricate and complex system, but we need to, we can do that and emulate through algorithms, through the tools and topics of parametrism. So what we do here, we have urban parametric urbanism models. We moved from single author to multi-author projects. And basically here what it is, the urban texture builds up where each subsystem or intervention project is like a new, totally unpredicted, totally free, endless form species, which is created by an architect, but it is always a species with rules, with scripts, with algorithms, which settle and nestles into this. And within parametrism, it evolves a path-dependent new urban identity and order, which has the degrees of freedom we need, but new ordering capacities, which elevate us out of that chaos. So what I'm saying here is that parametrism is the superior style. There's a trajectory of history where we actually have this the necessary degrees of freedom we needed to address the versatility of contingencies and differentiation of an evolving society came along with the degradation of ordering capacity. So when we left classicism behind, we lost symmetry and proportion. Yeah, great. So when we lost modernism behind, we lost seriality and orthogonality, and we have an increase in degrees of freedom, but a degeneration of order. And here we have a turning point with folding and parametrism where we have further degrees of freedom. We have now splines and NURB surfaces, gradients, which none of these prior styles have. So we have much more versatility. At the same time, we have much more ordering capacity through associative logic. So, and just goes to some of the projects, what it means, we can address very, very complex, multi-level, multi-trajectory, multi-entry, multi-institutional, multi-audience sites, and give them coherence, give them flow, give them navigation, and give them a kind of space which has principle and law, and a 360-degree interface of information-rich interface of communication, above, below, and all around, give all the offerings of society at our fingertips, but not in chaos, but according rule and rhyme and navigability. So this is what we deliver, these kind of space of simultaneity, but structured order through algorithmic principles. And we do that across all domains. And the final aspect, and this could be also interior urbanism of a huge scale, orientation, hundreds of offerings simultaneously present and made available. Now, how do we demonstrate this? How do we work this through in terms of the programmatic? We need to go to crowd modeling. We need to replace labels which designate programs, really model these live processes, parametrically variable event scenarios through agent-based parametric crowds, and we can do that by also embedding now and making these crowds information sensitive. These are semiologically charged environments, so there's a semiological overlay which the agents are responsive to. Now we can experiment and understand the meaning of very, very strange and intense configuration because we can model what it means. The meaning is, of course, the behavioral codes and rules which then emerge overall event patterns which can have a name. And that's the paradigm, the way we're demonstrating what this means sociologically, how the complexity which we're craving for makes eminent sense. It's not a waste. It's not a kind of meaningless exuberance, but an instrumentality of architecture on a new level of sophistication, which brings in big data, brings in all the engineering sophistications, and with a series of criteria of success which are homing in on the societal programmatics and social functionality we need to address and work through. So these lead to an innovation in the agent setup, which isn't in current crowd modeling as engineering crowds, it's just evacuating, but we have to model sociologically sensitive and charged up environments and can innovate, for instance, with new institutions where a lecture kind of peters out into a homeostasis, into an event space. And we make the architecture itself becomes agent, active agent, responsive with its own artificial intelligence, interacting with human agents, and we have this kind of flexibility and openness, but yet relevancy and specificity of event interaction, which constitutes society. And I'll just flick through these, and I think you get the message and meaning of where the global best practice is. Those who don't invest in these skills are left behind. It's like insisting on using a postal service instead of social media as a system of communication. That's where we at, that's where we have to be, that should be in this show, that should be on everybody's mind. And these are the kind of true criteria of success which architecture has to be delivering towards. So the demonstration of superior social functionality, compelling best practice, style and methodology. So that's my proposition. And it's very mature, it's very compelling, and I will argue this in detail with you later. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Peter Eisenman, who's making his way up.
Thank you, Daniela. I think we made a mistake in this conference, which should have been Patrick presenting and then the four of us critiquing what he presented. I got more notes now. I'm confused about what I want to say because I was so much involved with Patrick. What's so interesting for me is I can agree to disagree about everything he says, and that's quite a lot, because there are not many people who I would share the platform with who I can agree to disagree about anything. I am going to make three perhaps laconic points. I just want to start with a footnote to Stanley Tigerman, and to say that Stanley and I, well, it's not a footnote to Stanley, it's a footnote to me. Stanley and I are the only two living architects in the world who were at the first Architectural Biennale in 1976 in Venice, and are here at the Chicago Biennial. So I just thought that would be an interesting point to start with. The 3 points that I want to make. I started architecture in, I would argue, 1961 when I was traveling with Colin Rowe in Italy, or was about to travel with Colin to Italy. We came across the border from between Switzerland and Italy in a town called Chiasso to Cernobbio. We came to Como, where if I had images, which I probably should, but I'd rather speak without them, we came across the Casa del Fascio of Giuseppe Terragni. And Colin likes to say that Peter had an epiphany at that moment seeing this building. And it's true that I had an epiphany, and it's true that I've been trying to work out for the past 54, 55 years what the hell that was. And I had already seen Le Corbusier at Weissenhof, I'd seen Mies van der Rohe, I'd seen Adolf Loos, Behrens, Wright, everybody, but not one of them did what this particular building did for me. And I have spent most of my professional life trying to understand what that was. And it's a very elusive occupation. But it was part of why I went into teaching, part of why I did a doctorate dissertation at Cambridge, was that moment of seeing this building in Como. In the second day in Italy, that was the first day in Italy, in the second day, Colin and I drove to a small town in the Veneto called Montagnana, where there was my first Palladian villa. And Colin was a 90-degree day, 95 degrees, who knows, hot, dusty, etc. He said, I'm going to go sit in this cafe, outdoor cafe, and have a beer. I want you to stand in front of that building and tell me, until you can tell me something that's about the building that's not there. And I thought, what's he talking about? Something that's not there. It was my second lesson in architecture, to learn that architecture is unfortunately metaphysical, that it deals with things which are not there. And if I were having a critique with Patrick, it would be all of the wonderful things that he has to show us are there. And the things that I'm interested in are the things that are not there. And there's a huge gap in between. And I've been, again, working on that gap for some now 35 years. I've just published my book on Palladio, called Palladio Virtual, Virtual Palladio, i.e. what isn't physical. And so these two experiences, Palladio on the one hand and Terrani on the other, have made a search for me in the ensuing 40 years. I never know what to call that. And I never know what that means, especially when people tell me about sustainability and LEED certificates and technology, etc. And I think to myself, gee, Palladio certainly get a LEED certificate in the sustainability. I wonder what the problem is. And one of my best friend colleagues, who is an expert in sustainability, said to me, sustainability has no determinant in form and space. Now, if you write that deeply into your brain, you'll begin to realize that if you're studying sustainability in a design studio, you're in the wrong place. I will not comment on Patrick's comment on the Biennale, since I haven't seen it. But I was reading my latest issue of the New York Review of Books. Unfortunately, it's called the New York Review of Books. And I was reading it about a book, a review of a book that I was myself reading, Purity by Jonathan Franzen, Jonathan being one of my favorite authors. I can't quite tell you whether it's good or bad, but what attracted me was that it was written by a woman, Diane Johnson, former faculty member at Harvard and a very interesting theoretical person in linguistics, in post-structural linguistics. And in the second paragraph of her review, she says, in one of his essays, i.e. Jonathan Franzen's, called Mr. Difficult, Franzen distinguishes between one kind of novel, a status, in quotes, a status novel, like those written by Flaubert, Proust, Kafka, and especially William Gaddis, that invite a discourse of genius and art historical importance, and the kind of novel that he likes to read, this is the other kind, and believes in, the contract novel, referring to the contract between writer and reader, who both expect novels to be enjoyed, to be inspiring as well. Purity, the novel that she's writing about, she says, makes a stab at having status qualities in its complicated chronology and ambitious array of moral concerns, but in its page-turning sequence of events and hot sex scenes, it also tries to fulfill the contract. And I began to think, that's pretty much one of the issues that, for me, is important, the difference between a contract novel and a status novel. She concludes this review by saying, as a novel, that is Purity, about inauthenticity, an intense self-consciousness, and as a portrait of the modern world, it's convincing enough for me. Franzen, from whom so much is expected, seems on a sort of literary mountaintop with several paths down. The one he came up just now, mined with the melodrama and misstep, or there's the other path down where the status flag planted a little higher up on the slope, if he has the energy for climbing, with his already heavy backpack of contract books, and if he takes some time to contemplate the view before getting back to work. Now that, to me, divides the world into contracts and status, if you want. I divide it in another more appropriate, let's say, to this audience and this conference, between star architects and heroes. And my argument would be that star architects are contract architects. They give people what they want. They try and make society better. They're great reading. They make great images, as we have seen, etc. But do they aspire to that status of the problematic, let's say? And what I would argue is that schools, especially in the United States, from the early 20th century to the present, were dominated by conditions of the disciplinary authority. In the 1900s through to about 1920, the disciplinary authority was the École de Beaux-Arts. All the teachers were Beaux-Arts trained, and that's what you could study. Modern architecture was problematic, and even though colleges like MIT and Harvard started to build modern buildings, modern architecture wasn't taught. So that the only modern architect that we could remember and have in the United States was Frank Lloyd Wright. So in 1950, when I started school, the only modern architect, the authority, was Frank Lloyd Wright. He was a consummate hero. He was the Ayn Rand fountainhead heroic version of the architect. We all had on our desks, in the nature of materials, we all knew the right books, we knew the buildings, and it was the authority that broke away from the Beaux-Arts authority. In the 60s, we moved from Wright to Louis Kahn, and Lou Kahn became the new authority, and whether it was the Trenton Bathhouses, the Richards Medical Center, any number of the library at Exeter, Kahn was the architect of authority. And we looked to Kahn not as a star, but as a hero. In the late 60s, when Bob Venturi's book, Complexity and Contradiction, came out, followed by Learning from Las Vegas, Bob Venturi became another American hero, along with, let's say, Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, etc. I can remember teaching in the middle 60s, before the student riots, 65, 66, every student had the oeuvre complète on their desk of Le Corbusier. There were references. We spoke a common language. There was an authority. After Venturi's Complexity and Contradiction and Learning from Las Vegas, there were other authority figures, Jim Sterling, Aldo Rossi, people like this in the next generation in the late 70s, early 80s. We had, in 1980, a moment of transcendence when Paolo Portoghese, in the second Architectural Biennale, had the Strada Novissima, which celebrated a whole raft of new ideas and new architects. And at that moment, we had another hero, which was Michael Graves of the New York Five. And I say Michael Graves because he was a longtime friend, was a hero for me as a teacher, as a friend, as an architect. I would argue that the difference between Patrick and myself is not really one of substance, because the answer to the question that Daniela proposed would neither be yes nor no. Yes or no as a fixed answer would be wrong. And of course, I would argue that Patrick rejection of pluralism, he says, we also must reject the rejection. And that's where we would get into a really interesting argument about a meta-dialectic, let's say, one that transcends the dialectic. In conclusion, because I'm almost at my 20 minutes, I want to say that for students, for architects, etc., because of media, because of Instagram and Facebook and all these things, we suffer daily things that we only could see once a month when there were magazines. We now have every day, I've got a new Frank Gehry building, a new Wolf Prix building, a new Zaha Hadid building, a new Norman Foster building. Every day, I have to be up on these things. And I would argue that these people, all of us, when I say these, us who are here, are trapped in this culture of stars. The media needs a new star every day, etc. And I would argue in conclusion, perhaps Patrick and I would agree, we got too many stars and not enough heroes. Thank you very much.
Okay, we need to pause momentarily because there's a problem with the, yep. Okay, so our next speaker is Jeffrey Kipnis. Please help me welcome him.
Start my own timer. I want to make sure I don't get cheated. For having me. I think it's a fantastic opportunity, and I agree with both Patrick and Peter that microphone. I'm not so sure I want you to hear me yet. So I'm like, I don't know, you don't know Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I'm very much like the Sundance Kid. I like to move, and so this idea of sitting down giving this lecture, I'm not sure I can do it, but I'll try it. I do normally, I want to respond to one thing that Patrick said because I want to set up my talk in terms of it. He said something I think almost everybody in this room would agree with and that I spent most of my life agreeing with, and that is we should read expert commentary on all sorts of things, whether it's philosophy or social theory. And I did that most of my life, and what I'm about to tell you is why I no longer do that and why I don't think you should do it. And the reason for that is I know in a few minutes Rainer will be discussing Thomas Piketty, an important writer, And I will be sitting here thinking he's been thoroughly refuted as of January 2015 in a very important journal of economics. And then he and I will get into an argument about that, and it will sound like an important argument to you, who doesn't know who Thomas Piketty is, doesn't know Capitalism in the 21st Century, doesn't know the refutation in this important journal called Taxation of Capitalism in the 21st, but you'll be impressed. And then Luhmann, who I think is a very important social commentator, I would counter with Beck, and then Sanford, Quinter, and I would used to argue about Derrida versus Deleuze, and it's true. You read these things, they are totally absorbing, and they are absolutely crucial to read, and then you begin to think that that is where the intelligence of architecture should find its guidance. And then you realize that Shakespeare wrote 2 million words. There's now 1.5 billion words of commentary, economic commentary, psychoanalytic commentary. So either Shakespeare was the greatest intellect of all time, or simply by being a great playwright and having the intellection of his own field, he was able to discover knowledge far ahead of its time through his own intelligence. And from that point on, I stopped thinking that there was an obligatory discourse for everybody to know in architecture. It was a trick of critics, a trick of theorists, a trick of writers, and that what I started to do was start studying the intelligence at any point in time of the body of architecture at the moment. So I wanted to see everything everybody was doing. So instead of complaining about Peter, that there's 1,000 people looking at not just star architects every day, but hundreds of buildings every day by people that are well-known and unknown. I see buildings all the time. It's not like we're being burdened by that. It's just a fact of life. So I'm not here to tell you what you should do. I'm just telling you what you are doing, and that I'm now interested in the intelligence that all the architects are producing. I want to not figure out what you should do, but figure out what you are doing and what I can learn from that. So my job is what Marx used to say about Hegel. Hegel got it backwards. He thought the philosophers said it first, and then the artists and architects, or the artists and the writers in the world did it. In fact, the artists and the artisans of the world did it, and then the philosophers and critics figured out what they did. They said it, and then they got the credit for it. So I'm here to just pay, and so for that reason, I don't think the Chicago Biennale is a very good show. I think it's a perfect show. It's a perfect snapshot of the survey of the moment. Gigantic quantities of architecture intelligence are missing from it. Enormous bodies of work that I know exist, enormous tendencies, whole periods, whole issues that are not there. But what's there is deeply intelligent. Now, you cannot know its intelligence because the conversations of intelligence are missing. It's a representation of samples of intelligence. But as you look into each one, which I've spent some time doing, you'll find a profoundly interesting intelligence. And I think it's been really fantastic. So, like I said, I don't think it's a very good show. I do think it's a perfect show. So I'm going to show, as I do always. Here is a movie that I thought might predict exactly what we're going to see today.
Do you need a website?
I got one.
Create your own professional website.
So in this movie, you'll see the counterparts of Peter Eisenman. Peter Eisenman is going to be the short Jewish guy. Patrick Schumacher is going to be this kid from Kiev, very smart guy. And then I'm going to be the fat, outspoken guy with slobber on his face, and you will understand our positions. And by the way, this maps perfectly well on Teo and Rayner.
Into the grave.
Excuse me. You're not from this village.
No.
Where are you from?
Kiev. I was a student in the university there.
Tell me, is that a place where you learned how not to respect your elders?
That is where I learned there is more to life than talk. You should know what's going on in the outside world. Careful, my paper.
Why should I break my head about the outside world? Let the outside world break its own head. Well put.
He's right. As the good book says, if you spit in the air, it lands in your face.
Nonsense. You can't close your eyes to what's happening in the world.
He's right.
He's right and he's right. They can't both be right.
You know, you're also right.
He is right. He's too young to wipe his own out.
Okay, that's me. The asshole, you can't both be right, that clearly was Mark Wigley. Okay, I'm going to show you an event that happened one time in the entire history of the biology of Earth. One time and one time only. It's when almost every possible body form was made. It's called the Cambrian explosion. And I'm going to draw an analogy between that and what's happening in architecture today to try to give some reason why there is no pushback today. Why for the last 30 years, starting in 1990 and ending tonight to now, there's just no critical pushback. Not that whether there should or shouldn't be, but why there can't be. And in this period of time, it's called, you see it right here, there were this number of taxa, let's call them species. Then in this period of time, it went from this to this. And that set the stage, so you can see it. Here it is again from this period of time right before to this gigantic explosion in body types. And it's best to kind of, you see it here. So this is when you could easily have critical arguments about what should and shouldn't be, what could and couldn't be, but when it starts to do this, every possible niche is available. Every possible body style is available. And from this point in time, the number of body styles, or the number of species, or the number of taxa has declined. Not all these were, most of these things were really ugly. I mean, if you kind of look over here, you see all this stuff. It's like, this was a lot of crap. You know, but there was no reason to fight about body styles because there were three conditions that made this possible. There were exorbitant resources of oxygen, calcium, and plankton, lots to eat, lots to thrive on, and the calcium is important because it allowed for a new body technology. The Hox gene system was a way that bodies could be built out of calcium chemistry, and it had just gotten developed. And then an unprecedented proliferation of economic niches in the ocean. And now, if you look between 1990 and 2050, and you do a little bit of regression analysis, it'll hold up. This is not just an analogy. It actually holds up both in time regression and in quantitative regression. The exorbitant resources in the world, including, most importantly, which is left out of some of the economic arguments of the period, derivative economy. I know you think derivatives were bad because of the break, but derivatives produce not more real wealth, but more money. A gigantic amount of money, not a lot of more wealth, but that money produced all that architectural explosion. Third world economic expansion. New body technologies in architecture are absolutely fundamental. Nonlinear structures, which are FEM calculations, which could be done by computation, even though they were invented in the 50s. New material technologies. Fast track production, meaning you order it, custom steel gets produced and gets delivered just in time for your work. I mean, your work would not be possible without this. And then unprecedented niches, enormous market expansion, but this last one is important. Architecture qualities start again to become important building type qualities, meaning things that we used to separate. A building type quality was how it performed for its client and according to its program in the first 25 years. No one really cared about the form, no one cared about the space, no one cared about the quality of life because of the professionalization. Stuff like what we call now the Bilbao effect. These started to matter. And so form mattered. A major change happened, and that is, especially but not, exotic form became something valuable. You can say yes, say no. See, look, he's walking out on me. I hope you, I know. But it was such a valuable moment. All right. Now, I'm arguing that this is a really important thing because it is important to understand that for the commerce of buildings, the first 25 years is building type driven. The client has to like it, client has to make money, it does have to serve its purpose. All the subtleties of architectural production are not really important then. They happen much later. They come in later, they're much more indefinite, they're subject to vicissitude in an indefinite sense. Here are examples of 4 real buildings that were born stillborn. as buildings, meaning they sucked from the minute they got built, totally sucked. This Teatro Olimpico, 4 performances, it shut down. Literally 4. And it got so mothballed, that's why we have it today. This building, they couldn't wait to get out of it. It's the worst museum that ever existed. Fantastic work of architecture. These people hated this building. They lived in it for 8 years. It leaked in it every day. They couldn't stand it. You don't even know their name. It's not even named after them. And this building was built to cure tuberculosis, which it turns out a building can't do. And here are 4 unbuilt buildings. So these are great works of architecture that are great works of architecture even though they didn't get built. So you get the idea that there's a lot of stuff buildings can do that we don't fool around with, and there's a lot of other stuff. So this idea of a difference between building effect is really important. This was a fantastic architectural effect that's obvious. We've gotten better at that. This is not a piece of sculpture. This is not something, wow, how look at this. It actually teaches us to see the city in a different way. So it relates to the towers in the background. It relates to the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. In other words, it creates new contextual relationships. And we are learning to do these things. And people are learning to appreciate this. So architectural effects that are more and more subtle are becoming valuable more earlier and earlier. But other more subtle ones that we know what happens when you go down a stair and when you go up a stairs. No one else knows. I think you're changing levels. We know no matter how old you are, when you go down a stairs, you get scared. It's that simple. You go down to do laundry at 35 years old, into the basement, you're scared. And you've been getting scared a long time because that's where we put dead people. And that's where, that's it. And this, shut the lights off in this room and you'll see ghosts. Okay, now let me just show you something else. This is where music is right now. Now how do I get full screen your view? Well, the bottom. Now this is a website called Every Noise at Once, and I hope I can, okay. This is the algorithmic map of pop music as it currently exists. In other words, this website takes every purchase in pop music and records its genre and locates it by its relationship to, so if I were to click on this, you could hear it. I mean, it will play it, or maybe the music's off, don't worry about it. But it'll sound a lot like Eurodance, it'll sound like Bubble Trance, it'll sound like Acid Tech. It won't sound very close to breakbeat, but it'll sound closer to breakbeat than it would to disco polo. So this is a picture.
Addicted to the streets just like it's pops. Addicted to hustling.
If I want to, now if I go inside this, I can then see the algorithmic mapping of the deep trap world. Now, I'm telling you, this is exactly where architecture is right this second. It is not a disorganized, one-of-a-kind mess. We just don't know how to map this yet. We just don't know how to cultivate this discourse. These people do it on purpose, and they have, because music is bought and sold. By the way, the economy of music is totally destroyed by this, but it continues to proliferate. More music gets written because music performs another function. Rather, it doesn't form the political function it once performed. What it performs is the enfranchisement of smaller and smaller and more fragile, more ephemeral, and shorter-lived existential niches. And by the way, this is just pop music. You can see this for country music, you can see this for classical music. Google has just started to produce its own version on this, and it's in the Google Instruments section. And it is fantastic. And if you go down to the bottom of this, I mean, this thing is it totally changed my life. I want to do this for architecture. And so, so if you go to the bottom of it, you can see how, if you go to the site is called Every Noise at Once. Go to it, play around with it. Now, here is something I think is totally amazing. How many of you have been to this website? This is the Helsinki competition website. Virtually nobody. I mean, that's already interesting. 1,700 competition entries, 1,750 competition entries of smart architects working on a sophisticated problem, a site-specific museum of a branded museum. So the role of art in the world of a branded institution in a very difficult site. 1,700 smart people enter it, and you don't go look. You know why? Because you think you're tired of stars, you're tired of wiggly forms, you're tired, you know. You don't go look not because you're lazy, because you're inured. You know, because there is no way for you to analyze this information. Wait, here's what's great. So people tried, look at this. I mean, you go there and you say, what the hell? I can't make heads or tails of that. I'm not going to look. And so you go down and you go to the menu and you can choose, can you make this thing smaller? Patrick? I mean, this thing is being blown up. I mean, it's being enlarged. And anyway, in one of the menus, it gives everybody that entered a chance to tag their sites. Like it gives you 20 different qualities: flat, small, wiggly, wood, glass. And I was going to show you that, but I can't find it. But it doesn't matter. When you try those tags, when you try to look at those tags, you don't get anything, and so it turned out to be a waste of time. So what I did yesterday, just for the fun of it, is I thought I needed to find something else. Sorry, I need to get out of this. I took one of the images, and I took this image just at arbitrary, and I put it in Google image search.
You have 2 minutes.
Okay. The best stuff is coming, but I don't have time. Now, so in Google search, Google found all of these buildings that are similar to this building in the website within that in a minute. It found lots of others that I eliminated, but here are all these rough typologicals, and they all meet the ground. They all have very interesting discussions of how to meet the ground. Do I do it on plinth? I do it this way? I mean, these are smart buildings that have something interesting to say to each other. It's a very short-lived tendency. But this is the way we could begin to think about that, and I could do that entire thing. I could begin to reconstruct this. And so instead of trying to tell these people what to do, I can learn from the intelligence of this competition. And I have this competition all to myself. No one is going to the site. Plus, what you don't know is that I've been writing them for 2 years, and they have finally posted all the boards. And now all the plans, all the sections are on the site. So for $50 or $20 or nothing, you've now learned this, and no one else knows this. So you can really do analyses of 1,700 of these buildings. And by the way, and so here's some goals. One of my goals is to try to facilitate new short-term tendency conversations among people that don't know that those people don't know that they're in conversation with each other. I could email all of those people, and they'd be surprised to find it, because they haven't looked through that damn thing. You know, and they haven't thought the genius thought of Jeff Kipnis that you just stick it in Google image search, because it took me over 1.5 years to think of it. And then this is, don't make this mistake of taking this poor woman who thought of this this is the first woman architect in Pakistan. She shows up in Western publications over and over as this woman, this project. Her name is Yasmin Lari, fantastic architect, but she's also this woman who does these buildings. So she's not just giving her life for activist art. She's like a real architect who cares about real things. Anyway, there's other stuff, but that's it. I'm done. Time for discussion.
Okay, so now what happens is everybody comes up. No, you have to go up there. This is fantastic, but we should do it up on the stage. Okay, so our two speakers that are going to speak after the intermission are heading over there, Rainier DeGraff and Theodore Spiropoulos. And what I would like to do is to open this up to everybody that's participating up there as well as the audience, and I will walk around with the microphone to ask questions and also to challenge. Absolutely,
I
yes.
raised an issue, the difference between a status work and a contract work.
Okay.
You could argue, let me just finish the question. You could argue that the 2,700 or whatever it is were all contract work, that there was not one work of status, because perhaps people of status who have that capacity wouldn't enter that dumb competition.
Well, first of all, that's not true. Really significant.
We entered.
I mean, but I'm serious. Really significant
I
architects.
understand. But I'm saying is, from
like
your
Hernan
your
Diaz
research,
Alonso entered it. I
how
mean,
the
top-notch
hell
people.
can you get?
Yes. Okay. Here's my argument is this. There is no basis for adjudicating, in any sense at all, a top. I mean, you should look at the jury reports and the prizes. No one remembers Mark Wigley. Mark Wigley was the head of the jury. Jeannie Gang was his sidekick, and there were some local architects. There were no significant winners. No one knows the winner. I don't think the winners are happy to have won.
But is the thing going to get built, first of all?
No, it was an idea.
I think that's almost a more interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, but for me, like there was if you remember the Spreegopen, none of these people are old enough, but the Spreegopen competition in 1990 was 900 entries, which was unprecedented quantity of entries to a competition. Axel Schultes won it, it's built. Both of those are really horrible things to have happened. I mean, the fact that he won it and the fact that when you go to Berlin, it's built. And yet, when the book came out, no one could wait to buy it, because to find out what the state of the discourse was and what the nature of problems were, I mean, that was the most exciting thing. And stuff like landscape urbanism, tectonic, many of the themes of the 90s were born in that competition. Many people didn't realize that other people were working on the same topics they were working on. Lots of REM's things that were associated with REM were found out to be being done by other people. Axel Schultes' work was a neo-modernist work. We didn't realize that it was a trend.
Tell me, Jeff, what's Charles Jenks been doing all his life with these
Trying
charts?
to do these things.
Yeah, well, what's the difference between what you're talking about?
Well, the fact that Charles was, the fact that he was a Linnaeus, that he was trying to do these trends, but if you look at the way he tried to do them, and if you looked at he had an idea about these kinds of categories when it didn't matter, when the debates were clear and I'll give you an example. When magazines governed the discourse, then editor filters made decisions about the discourse. Now that you mentioned that, for example, websites do that, they are non-edited. You see everything and anything. It's mostly if they can get material. If you send something in to enough websites, you'll get on. And there's 139 active websites right now. Bob Globson, look, I love that guy, but I mean, he does work every day. But you see something every day, and the commentary is virtually entirely about building performance and personal aesthetic opinion. That's it. That's the range of architectural judgment about everything. And so what's really interesting is how good people are becoming at building performance commentary. And I mean, I think that's smart. There's nothing wrong with that. I like the fact that, you know, buildings are starting to perform better and better and better, and people know their technology better and better and better. But people don't realize, for example, Peter, that House 2, you knew it was going to leak and that there was no, that metal you stop stuff from
Flashing?
no flashing in it on purpose. You know, they thought you just didn't know how to build.
But
Okay,
just
I'm
come
sorry
in?
to interrupt, but I would like to open this up to other panelists as well
Yeah,
as
yeah,
to the
well,
audience. Because I know Peter and Jeff can talk to each other all night.
Yeah, but he was just...
No, I was just trying to come in because very stimulating two presentations, and I feel that the Cambrian Revolution explosion is an interesting model. I would say it represents what happened post the crisis of modernism, mostly in the late 70s and 80s, perhaps in the early 90s, where you have the proliferation of directions, where you have, you have postmodernism, deconstructivism, neo-historicism, and onto minimalism, neo-rationalism, etc. But what we then witnessed, in a sense, is a condensation. A lot of this has been weeded out, and we have a convergence going on, but with an internal variation proliferating. So I think you could have also, so you have the explosion of, let's say, vertebrates, but the dinosaurs disappear. And I think that's the way to look at it. And I'm very interested, yes, there are a lot of nuisance and a lot of new trajectories which could be distinguished, but for me, most of them are and should be and will be in a new space of possibility, which excludes all the dinosaurs which are no longer viable. And I would start to call them the subsidiary styles and trajectories of parametricism, and there is a huge variety. Perhaps that variety within that spectrum is much larger than the whole of the history have brought up to this point, but yet a lot of it is excluded as well. It's not a free-for-all.
Okay, but then let me ask you a question. Let's distinguish between two possible notions, one of analytic parametricism and the other of synthetic parametricism. Because yours is a twofold parametric argument. One is parametric performance, which I think is absolutely fantastic, and you have championed it at every level, building level and architectural level. And the other one is a parametric style. So I could take any building, let's say it's stick style, and I can parametrize each element, and I can check its performance and be doing parametric architecture, and in principle be following your book. Yet you continue to champion the synthetic parametric half of your argument.
I would agree. I mean, there was something interesting you said, and nobody said it as radical as you just said it. Sorry. That when you are obsessed with sustainability and you're in an architecture school, you're probably in the wrong place. I mean, I think I paraphrased you correctly there. I think the same applies to some extent for parametricism. That if you're into parametricism and into architecture, you may also be in the wrong place, because the whole thing, if you look at what created the revolution of parametricism, let's say revolution in the computing technology, revolutions in the information technology, that is primarily a revolution in the information technology. Whether that is necessarily a revolution for architectural form, I don't know, because I'm often inclined to think the opposite. I think the fact that we know more about things, that we can produce almost anything, simply, strangely enough, allows things to stay the way they are, more than that they necessarily revolutionize form. I look at an object, and at a certain moment, all kinds of smart technology, all kinds of senses, all kinds of blah, 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 allow me to know more about it than I did before that was there. To what extent does that constitute change? I mean, that doesn't change the object, it doesn't change me, but my relation fundamentally changed. Now, imagine you meet somebody, and I'm about 50, thanks for referring to me as a young man, by the way. I'm 50 years old, sort of in the middle of my career. And you meet somebody. You meet somebody that you may get romantically involved with. And you know, there's been others before you. We all know that. I mean, we're adults, we're modern people. But then you go on Facebook, and then you go on every single Instagram thing, and then you see the faces of those who were there before you. And
Why would you do
now
that?
we think, you know, so then we think maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4, and it's actually 83. And we kind of know, because I mean, if you think about all the stuff you've been up to, it's kind of silly to think that it were 3. No? I mean, it's knowing another like you know yourself. We now know politicians gossip about each other. We know politicians, you know. Ever since Kennedy, we know all of this. But there's a difference between knowing, and it fundamentally it changes our knowledge about things. And I think by constantly interpreting it as something that has a major impact on form, we sort of get blindsided to its real revolution, is the fact that it's not the things that change, it's the relation between things that is fundamentally changes. And I would almost argue for a kind of complete freeze frame in order to take stock of that properly. So, because nobody knows, every single smart technology, parametric conference you go to, nobody knows the future. I mean, the things I hear about it remind me mostly of biblical text. I have another presentation, by the way, of comparing text from the Bible about the apocalypse and blah, 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 to the kind of advertisement text of Cisco. It's remarkable. But that's in a way a feeling I have about it. You claim it's modern architecture. I think it's an old-fashioned insistence on form in a time when the revolutions are simply in other domains. Sorry, I mean to be the caricature of the
But can I
of your film, but
just let me help with this. It's really quite important, because I have a theory of Peter and Jeff and Ranier slash Rem, and for me that's a dialectic of a necessary and important insistent that formal research, the expansion of formal repertoires, a language describing formal structures, spatial structures, is an important element in the evolution and innovation of the architecture. It's very, very important, and I think Ranier doesn't see it, Rem doesn't seem to see it. At the same time, I insist also, which the two of you are maybe blind to, maybe it's systematically blind to make your innovation so much more powerful, is that there is also a scanning of sociological trends, economic trends, the programmatic upcroppings beyond the canons of what we recognize as architecture, the periphery, the big, fat, ugly buildings, and all these things and what they mean. So that's also necessary. But somebody has to bring together and think together formal innovations, expansion of repertoire with respect to addressing and mapping these onto these new phenomena, these new potentialities. And I think I am the one who want to insist on that. Form works, form performs. Of course, initially there are these explosions where you think there's an exoticism of new forms, and when we first discovered computers, that was kind of nearly set free, and I subscribe to formalism, but there comes a time where these new explosion of formal possibilities are put to work, and they matter, and there is a difference. A box can never perform as intricately and sophisticated, put its feelers out and be responsive and sensitive and channel and structure and guide the contemporary complexity of society. So that's where I'm at. So I see the two of you as some kind of a necessary dialectic.
Yeah, who's the two of you?
Him versus us.
The four of us, you mean?
No.
Wait, hang on.
Thesis, antithesis, I'm the synthesis.
I mean, this is
But let
working
me
out the way you planned it.
let me ask you about this performance, okay? Because I think give me the correct pronunciation of your name.
Reiner. Sorry, should I be the expert on my name?
But you got Peter.
Reinier.
Reinier.
Yeah.
Is that Dutch?
It's Dutch, yeah.
And what is
It's
it
about
auf
as Dutch.
Deutsch?
Auf Deutsch it is Reiner.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Auf Deutsch is Reiner.
I guess I thought it said Reinier made it illegal to discuss in the United States since he so highly eroticized it with his love life. Plus, I don't want to mention my numbers, but I'm going to change it to a slightly.
You're older, huh?
And then Teo will, of course, want to say something. We have to call on Teo. He won't just wait. You know. But I think what Patrick and what Reinier just said have to be put together exactly. He said form performs. And he said form performs, but do we want the performances, who knows the right performances? I do think that's absolutely right. And so 15 years ago, when digital work was in its naive moment, mass customization was thought to be the trajectory of architecture, like it is for shoes. And yeah, we were all thinking about the ribbon window, the quarters ribbon window, and you know, and so you would see all these various windows, or you see all kinds of things where there would be a different something for everybody within the same familiarity. And so what this was a kind of high celebration of individuality within community. We were all individuals within a large community, and your work does that continuously. You think that is the self-evident, bona fide political performance of an architectural form. The more and more I think about it, the more and more I think about stuff like the Teatro Olimpico, I think architecture, that is the worst possible project for architecture. Architecture should not do that. Architecture should not celebrate individuality. It should enforce collectivity, say, for example. Enforce a uniform collectivity, or at least enforce a kind of benign order, because right this second, what's happening in the cities is a total dissolution of the fabric of civil polities. In other words, you don't walk down the street anymore with the contract of civility with polities that you don't belong to intact. You live in a city of 1 million people, 2 million people. You know you don't know everybody. You know you're not the same religion as everybody. You know you're not the same ethnic background. So the idea of a polity is long gone. But there has been for a long time a contract of polities. Each of those people belong in a polity, but you're all American, you're all Chicagoans, you all live by a certain code of benign civility. That's gone away. So now we're living in a kind of fragile system of estrangement. And when architecture first comes into its own, it's when communities of proximate exchanges replace familiar exchanges, and it was there to enforce civility. And
it still does that and should do that.
It should do that, but if you keep celebrating everyone's individual entitlement, I know this is a martial function, but I'm just saying we have to have a discussion about the role of the performance. So I like it or not. I mean, you could be on one side, you could be on the other side, but you can't just say architecture performs and I know it's right performance.
I think the right performance of an individual institutional project, which invites an architect to translate that into kind of a spatial offering, this judgment is made by the client, and they have to be convinced, and in the end, the market and the success of the building in real life will be a verification or refutation. But what we have to do, we have to at least get the right concepts and tools and analytics and repertoires, synthetic and creative repertoires, into gear, which brings and upgrade our intelligence to have a better chance to deliver towards that. And that's, I think, and that starts with analysis of society. We confronting all sorts of clients all the time, so we have direct, real, practical experience with what society requires of us, but also we read and write and experience and theorize, use social theory to understand it better, classify it, and guide ourselves within this. And I think we live in a whole cluster and network of differentiated polities, which nevertheless, which could be highly specific and this kind of the multitude of quite different social situations and offerings spreading across the urban space, that's society for us, but we need to navigate and refine relevant partners of communication where we then, and the environment will tell us what the social codes are, we need to, which are respected, and structure a discourse, make a specific communication institution possible. That's very important, but there also everybody has to learn at least some very, very generic, so it's kind of gradated, very finely differentiated, but also then a system of hierarchies of generalization where everybody knows by now what it means to be in a very, very public, general space, moving through an airport, what the do's and don'ts are there as well. So there's also universally shared, and that's globally shared, protocols of interaction. And at the same, so that's what we're addressing. And that's the program of architecture.
I have a question for you. You said in your talk, and because you don't sound, I have to say that whether it's Rainier or Rainer, that I agree with what he said is, you said we have to show that parametricism is a compelling superiority, a life-enhancing advantage.
Yeah.
And I say, I never teach my students about life-enhancing advantages.
Yeah.
I teach them about form making.
Yeah.
And when I go, I'm sorry, I want to make sure we understand.
Yeah.
When I went to see the painting of Piero della Francesca, I don't care about life-enhancing advantages. That is a life-enhancing in itself.
Yeah, but with the discipline doesn't care, it annihilates itself. So that could be.
That's not true.
You could, Peter. You can be that. Take that position, and I validate this. In the division of labor of the discipline itself, I think there need to be protagonists who specialize in formalism,
but
formal
not
discourses.
architects.
But that can't be the total story, because society needs an evolving and a built environment which works and delivers.
Okay.
And if you,
Okay.
yeah,
What I find so strange, and here I'm going to try to make an analogy with something you said a long time ago. On the one hand, you argue for the autonomy of form and for the superiority of form. At the same time, towards the end of your talk, you show behavioral patterns that you analyze, from which you deduct form. And then what you do, because I mean, brilliant form, if you argue form of autonomous, form is partially autonomous of use. So now, you've spent the better part of your life enjoying that, I think. And when it's either that or it's not. You know, because what the smart city and all these kind of things do is they analyze our behavioral patterns at any given moment, and they cast them in stone, they eternalize them until we become the prisoners of the straitjacket that those cast in stone behavioral patterns have become. Now, you once spoke about intruders, and I love that. It was inhabitants, no, we have intruders, which is wonderfully provocative. Very true. Intruders in a case when form is autonomous from use. Any form of use becomes an intrusion of form. Now, what the smart city does, it creates its own intruders by the autonomy of function, by taking random function at any given moment, autonomizing it, supposedly like a glove catering to human use, but at any other moment that human use becomes an invasion of the functions it supposedly created itself. And that is a very interesting full cycle thing, and I can't get my head around it, because I think there is a fundamental, I mean, it's almost of a Wittgensteinian beauty, you know, that the latter half of your lecture is essentially a denial of the first half, and I just don't, but maybe Jeff gets it. But
Yes,
I mean, you're the biggest advocate of pluralism.
Wait, let me just try to do it because of a directly addressed. 1 second. No,
1 second.
It's very coherent. I'm not claiming the autonomy of form as its own discourse. That's what Peter and Jeff are doing. I'm into the instrumentality of form and compositional repertoires, but in order to have something to become instrumental, I have to kind of proliferate and put it in front of me as a set of choices. But the work is totally coherent. The behavioral patterns and interaction scenarios you'll see in the end use precisely the kind of repertoires of space making, dynamic curvature, complexity, open interpenetrating forms, which I've been advocating through the images and through the work. So this comes coherent, and then it also becomes fluid and responsive, so the parameters are becoming malleable. But there is no autonomy of form here setting absolute. This is always about form empowering function.
Okay.
Theo.
We'll be back to that. Yeah, there you go. Theo.
his protege.
Okay. So, I mean, for me anyway, I think there's a bit of a problem with terms of reference. So, for example, the way that you speak about the smart city and the way that you talk about parametric design, one could also throw in your approach to diagrams and your approach to actually working through this kind of legibility.
Absolutely.
So at some moment we have to make differences that make a difference, and with that I think it's important to talk about, let's say, some of the complexities that are really at hand, because you seem to want to sort of pause everything with an idea of trying to catch a litmus test of what's going on there, and I think Jeff showed a taxonomy of things that don't necessarily have this kind of idea that there is a blueprint of the past that will serve as a way of understanding the future. And so I think at some moment, I think that there is a complexity. I think form is a participant. And I think to a degree, everybody here works within that formal project. There is a behavioral project, which is actually looking for architecture and its communication devices and its instrumentality of how that can actually become something that's more shared and collective. And I don't know, I think Peter mentioned something between star systems and the heroic, or the heroes. And I think that this is a really important thing, because I'm not really sure that people believe in heroes anymore. Like, I could say I'm pretty old school in the belief
In heroes.
that there should be. Because in a certain way, those are more about projects than people, and those people actually had a certain accountability with that. What I find today within the kind of contemporary conversation is a bit of indifference, a lack of actually trying to move between, let's say, what you posed as sort of black and white, where we actually started to see these diagrams that Jeff was putting up there, which actually said there is a manifold of differences, but some of those differences don't necessarily render themselves, and they will become obsolete. So I feel like it's very difficult to sort of try to take stakeholding at this moment in time.
But I think sorry.
First of all, what I would mean by a hero, there were teachers. There were teachers who could draw all the things they were talking about. In other words, they knew enough. And to me, to be able to give to a student, say, hey, let's look at the plan of the Teatro Olimpico, and let's understand what the problem is of this building that Jeff showed. And I would argue we've lost that heroic kind of behavior. There are very few teachers today that can draw anything, know anything, can see anything. And I do believe that society, and Jeff and I have talked about this many times, architecture is one of the few professions that denies its heroes. I mean, my son, who works for Major League Baseball, is saying that baseball is in trouble because they don't have any heroes. The basketball has heroes, football has heroes, soccer has heroes, but baseball has lost their heroes. And I think every discipline needs heroes.
This sounds like Trump. So we don't have victories anymore. We used to have victories, but we don't have them anymore. That's
right.
I'm
we're
thinking,
going to make him president.
Yeah, I know. You better. But I was thinking, what is the difference?
Just gets what it comes to.
But ever since you mentioned,
let me leave one stone not unturned. Let me leave one unturned.
Unsterned.
Yeah.
Very good.
I very much want to talk about Bob Stern in here. Peter Eisenman does do work on form without regard to program, or without regard to the effect. That doesn't mean there is no effect.
Right.
Okay. So some time ago, when I was telling, I used to think my job was to understand very difficult work by architects that were working in arcane manners and try to sort of become their interpreter. Then I realized that wasn't my job. That my job was to figure out what were the performances of this work architecturally beyond what they were doing. And so Peter and I are tied at the hip as closely as two people can possibly be, and I'm proud of that, but we are not the same. And my sense of what his project is deeply political, deeply performative in a sociological way. I think he likes to hear it. I think he doesn't believe it. But when he's working on the autonomy of formal processes, you don't use a 4-square grid, you use a 9-square grid because a 4-square grid leaves an unoccupiable center. You don't know why people shouldn't be in the center.
Because it's the power position.
Oh my God, I can't be in the center. But let's say he autonomously screws around with a grid and it puts puts a column in the middle of a doorway. Another architect would take it out because it's subordinate to the program. He'll leave it there, and then you can't get your bed in. You can't, all kinds of bad stuff will happen. And then I'm posed with the problem of, okay, what good does that do? I have to answer that question. That he didn't have to answer the question. He had to get some idiot to build it.
Hey, Jeff,
Hang on,
I want to
answer
add
my
something
question.
to what you, look.
Let me finish.
Okay, go ahead. I thought you were finished.
I know.
About the idiot to build.
If you walk up to that and you see that column, and not only see that column, but you begin to pay attention enough to understand why it's there, you are paying attention to a building in an entirely different way. You are paying close attention to the building. The building cannot seduce you into any other performances. If you walk into a cathedral, and the cathedral is designed, or a museum, in such a way as that you are forced to pay close attention to the architecture cannot put you in the position of accepting the obedience to the priest, for all those reasons that will happen after that, or to the art that they decide to put on the wall. You don't have to think it's important, because you are now paying attention independently. You are not seduced by architecture into submission. And architecture's most important role, look around you, is to seduce you into submission. Gigantic spaces with fantastic ornamentation. We're sitting here above you. You are submissive to us at this very moment. And so this is what I think his work contributes to an accomplishment of. But I do think every building demanding close attention every second of the day is just a god-awful prospect for the world.
And there are none.
There aren't that. That's right. So there is this
Jeff,
idea.
let me throw something that you threw at me this week. And I want to raise this because it throws the discussion into a different way. If we were to argue that Alberti, in his De Re Edificatoria, his 10 books, was preempting Newtonian physics. In other words, he had a theory of homogeneous space, parts
We're just
relating.
taking it for granted.
Yes. Well, he was preempting in the sense that Newton didn't exist until a couple of centuries later, but Alberti wrote the Discourse for Architecture, let's say. This is why I want to get on a wicket, which I think is interesting. So Jeff says, why don't you read this little book about quantum physics? And I started to read this thing, and I said, hey, if in fact everything up until quantum physics is Newtonian, what is the role of space and time in relativity, quantum mechanics, etc., that nobody seems to be taking into consideration at all? In other words, the true breakthroughs as they were in Brunelleschi's time about perspective, about drawing, about ratios and mathematics, Cartesian grids and things, it would seem to me that someone would stop for a minute and say, what about quantum physics? What does it mean for architecture? And I'm just curious, since you had me read this little book, and maybe I misread it, but it seemed to me to say, how come we're still teaching Newtonian physics?
We live in it.
What? Tell me. Why do we live? Why do we live in it?
I mean, why do we live in Newtonian?
No, why don't we live in quantum physics?
We're not small enough.
Exactly. You're neither small enough nor
There
large
isn't a
enough.
good enough diet yet, but.
I think I want to say,
But I think the question.
I think the meaning of architecture, including Alberti's and the theory, in a sense, is quite specific and validates this, has to be immanent to the life processes which is accommodated within it. It can't be projecting cosmologies, etc. I think that went wrong when the first time the semiological project came about within postmodernism.
Let me answer the question, your question a slightly different way. Because you understand why you should not read books, because this is the kind of
Why you shouldn't read books?
You should read books. You should
Not
just
physics.
not draw conclusions for you cannot learn to do architecture from a physics book or a sociology book.
You can think
You
architecture.
can learn from anything that gets you excited about it, and then, like, if you love bridge, that's good enough. You can do your architecture from a bridge book. It just, I don't want a billion architects, or I don't want 100 million architects reading one philosophy book. I need 100 million architects do their own reading, and then I get 100 million readers reading 100 million different things, and then I get to survey that work and then draw.
What a waste of time.
Yeah, I understand you think that,
But I sit there and look at your diagrams, and I hear you talk about Alberti, Brunelleschi, and I think the real confusion, the real lethal confusion that there is that the current proliferation of styles and ideas and individual signatures, that we mistake them for breakthroughs. You talk about breakthroughs.
Well,
there are some, but
when you
let
say
me
we mistake
finish.
them for breakthrough, I mean, I just want to know, who are you talking for?
The general mood in architecture, and in as much as I experience it, it's maybe presumptuous to act as a spokesman for it, but let me finish the thing. Yeah, that sometimes maybe a long time passes between one breakthrough and another. That was always the case. Maybe that is still the case. But somehow the market economy forces everybody into postures of extravagance, where we now have a breakthrough for each architect. I mean, it gets to a point, if I extrapolate your diagram to the ultimate conclusion, we will have 1 million one-man practices, which are all geniuses, but they won't have an audience, because their audience is out by themselves being a genius as well. And that is the fundamental toxic, because you talk about a break of collectivity. It is exactly that. It is,
But
the difference between a star.
Does that financial situation need you to take care of it, or will that not take care of itself?
I'm sure it will take care of itself.
It
but
has
I mean,
already taken care of itself.
Well,
Look at the number of people that are not going to the Helsinki website. Look at what a gigantic failure that was,
Yeah, but I
for
think
exactly the reason you just said.
But I think yes, things take care of themselves, but I think that's also somehow a feeble excuse to ignore them, because I'm sure the power of architects is extremely limited in other domains. Does that give you an excuse to ignore those other domains? I'm sure our own power is extremely limited, but the power we have is that we're in the middle of trends which we can articulate, and hopefully,
For me, I think architecture is not like a weekly movie. It's not like this is a good movie, that's a bad movie, and you've done somebody a favor by saving them $15 or $25 or $100. I think architecture.
But it is exactly that, according to the diagrams you show.
Except how much it costs.
Exactly that, according to the diagrams you show. I mean, you're
you're
beginning to sound like Patrick.
You made your point. I accept
Well, what's missing in the diagram? What's missing in the diagram is the selection process, the convergence, the validation process, the fall off, the extinctions. It can't but just be the explosion itself.
I didn't say the explosion itself is to try to tell us how we should spend our critical effort now. Our spending our critical effort now to say, here's the choice you should make, and here's what's wrong with the other choice, is a waste of effort. The critical effort
Can't
we
be,
should.
Jeff, if it can't be,
What
then
I
we really
think we should
then
do
we're really cynics and
is to point
and
out
irrational play.
Are there any questions from the audience,
Yeah,
by the way?
We need to put the audience. I was just
Point out
time to
the
put the audience in.
positive effect of the intelligence that's manifesting itself.
Please just
If
raise
you
your
can
hand
do
and I'll come
that,
to you.
You've done something extremely valuable. I can
There
do
are
that.
plenty of questions
Plenty
out
of
here.
questions. Gentleman with the beard.
Let's have some questions.
All right, so this is kind of focused to Patrick, but I guess it more or less applies to everybody. So I was wondering if Patrick's comments on sort of the demonstration of superiority of certain, at least specifically he's mentioning parametricism, but I guess that applied to all the technology involved, if this sort of explains why almost all of your short pieces of work are posted on Facebook, and why it seems like you're trying to bring the architectural discourse to Facebook or to social media, and if that's a way to get away from what Jeff described as sort of like the typical shallow responses to what is currently posted on most architecture websites.
Well, I try to use any means necessary, and I think there are different media and different levels of conversations. So I do love Facebook rather than Twitter because I can make an argument, I can run 500, 1,000 words, and I'm interested in responses and then coming back. But there's also, you know, essay length contribution, there's lectures, and there are treatises. I mean, there are books. I think the books are still necessary because you need to have also build up a more comprehensive synthesis where you cash out and fill out some of those promises and make arguments more elaborate. That would be, but I find it very, very productive, the Facebook experience in media. And magazines are far too slow in many levels. Yeah. But there's also, you know, it's not a breakthrough every half year. I agree with that. And we need to really try to identify these breakthroughs in this whole panoply of proliferating options and start to filter. We need to take a stance, we need to qualify, and that's something which becomes problematic because we're so much used to this kind of brainstorming pluralism, forgetting that brainstorming has a purpose to first of all have initially a kind of free for all, but then to take stock, filter, classify, and draw conclusions. And somebody needs to start doing this, and there's a kind of polite resistance to doing this, and that leads to a kind of fallacious irrationality.
So this is probably an unfair question, and more of an observation, and being one of these dinosaur faculty members who probably doesn't know anything and just trying to educate some students in something. But there's a lot of bravado up here, and it's curious to me, and I don't know why, that there's no women up here.
Wait,
what I want to...
The reason is they charge too much.
Yeah. What I am curious about, and this would just be all speculation, but I'm curious as to how this discourse would be different if there were some women up here and we had that kind of perspective and a different attitude. Because one thing I can say after teaching for many, many years is women bring a completely different sensibility to the discourse. And it seems to me that there's an exclusion here.
But why are you asking us that question?
Yeah. Because...
And why aren't you saying African Americans, people of color,
well, we could
lesbians?
say
but you didn't.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, I've been
and
teaching
so
for
it's such
40
an obvious.
years.
It's such
I
a.
have 10 women in my class and 10 men. The women do
Peter,
better
you are-
than the men.
Peter, hang on.
And what are you talking about? Now I'm going to make a gender distinction? That's a bunch of junk.
I want to answer that.
Okay.
So I'm the person who organized it. I'm a woman. And I just happened to invite my heroes, whose projects I admire.
I love women.
So that's the answer to
Great.
that.
Talking about.
I spoke about women.
What I want to know is, have you ever written about women for an architecture publication? Do you know if any of us have? There you go. So you really don't know much about what you're talking about, exactly like you just said. So a little bit of bravado goes a long way.
Here,
I think that's uncalled for. Not really uncalled for.
I have a quick question for Patrick, actually. When I was looking at the parametrics that you were showing, I also did some of my own research before coming into this. The parametrics in your designs, is it as a means to break away from bureaucracy, like where you have people from different backgrounds, from different walks of life, just force them to interact with each other? Is that like what you meant by the parametrics and the different, not diagrams, but different approaches that you go through in creating your spaces?
Yes, I think you put your finger on something important. I think modernist institutional designs and buildings have bureaucratic structure in terms of separation of serious departmental functions and sub-functions. They're neatly divided and separated out. And within each of them, there's kind of repetition. So I'm saying separation, specialization, repetition. These are the principles of modernist architecture, even applied to the city with the different zones and districts. And these were the principles of modern bureaucracies, both in governmental administrative institutions as well as corporate bureaucracies. And that alignment is important. That's the way I always want to read the epochal styles like modernism relative to epochal or socioeconomic epochs. Fordist, mechanical mass production era, for instance, of the first stage of the industrial society. And we're in a different world right now, and that's not something I invent and impose. If now somebody like Google comes to us or other corporates, they're very, very different. They have their fields of multiple populations intersecting, self-organizing. There's a lot of external consultants flowing in and out. There is gradients, overlap, interpenetration, continuous evolution of spatial scenarios, and we've worked on these with students at Harvard and AA and elsewhere. And if you look at the proposals, for instance, which Heather Big, for instance, delivered to the new Google campus, it's a different world. It's a sponge space, a continuously differentiated field space, and just to say that these intuitions have been growing a long time, and these breakthroughs are rare. So I can say these things, and the intuitions were put forth by both Peter and Jeff by now nearly 20 years ago, and they need to be worked through, cashed out, elaborated. And I have a long trajectory on this. I don't believe in kind of monthly flashes of genius. I believe in cumulative elaboration of these pertinent, historically pertinent, profound intuitions which emerge within the discipline, and we've been working with. That's what I believe. But then there's also, of course, enormous amount of variety and sub-articulation within that as well. So thank you for the question.
Hi. My question is about contextualism, and I just wanted to ask, many very successful architecture firms have a certain style, formal style, and when the world is so, not just one site in every city is different, but every site is different. My question is, why is it that firms that have a particular style are more successful than firms that don't have a noticeable style? Anyone?
Well, I know the answer, but I mean,
Enlighten us.
Because if you have a style and you sell your style, you're easy. It's like, why do you buy a Chevy, rather than why do you buy a car you can't identify? Particularly in relationship to contextualism. And the contextualism, architecture hasn't always been about context. Contextualism is a 40-year-old idea. It has always needed to be about location in the sense that it's fixed to the ground. But the idea that you would diagram a context and relate to the context actually is a fairly mid-20th century idea, and has to do with changes in construction and changes of how buildings are built and what they can do, how you can relate to an outside building. So it's a mid-20th century theoretical idea and ways to relate to it. And it had a lot of success. So European contextualism and American contextualism. And so it was incorporated into both professions and turned into a value structure that almost everybody outside of architecture knows. So go look for a client who is really good at relating the building to the context. What's happened, however, is two things. One is the context transforms very quickly now. And so the likelihood of a contextual intervention maintaining its relationship to the context, particularly in cities, is increasingly unlikely. And secondly, buildings that are put into the context often are the instruments of changing the context. So buildings that come in and are strongly contextual oftentimes are the motivators for transforming the context away from that contextual. So the contextual apparatus has now been incorporated and started to become its own undoing. And so these style boutiques, and they're quite good, it's a little bit like being building type boutique. If you're going to go into business in America, I don't know about this in Europe, but you go in as a building type boutique. Like, for example, right now, American offices are specializing in university buildings and in legal buildings because they know that the market for those buildings are going to be the most. And they're very so you have wings of your office specializing in those schools because that's the most practices are going to get built. So you specialize where the market research shows you're going to go, and then you optimize your relationship and your presentations to that. That's a very good thing to do if you're interested in business, which I think is an important thing to be interested in, and it's a very important thing to do to understand how the building type works in relationship to that. The short-term and intermediate-term effects you have to study, and that's why contextualism has basically disappeared as a significant long-term professional building type value, and totally disappeared as an academic discourse.
I tend to disagree with this. I think contextualism is now an a priori condition of everybody's work to be a respectable contribution to contemporary architecture, and I believe in such new standards. Best practice standards include contextual sensitivity, affiliation, embeddedness. That's an a priori, and parametricism delivers this.
Nobody thinks
we should collectively in this have such values and share such value, and to largely we do. And that's.
Hang on a second. Yeah. Did you see the Frank Gehry building I showed? Do you think that was a contextual building?
No. And it should be criticized for its lack of.
Wait. Did you see it, and do you think it was a contextual building?
No. He's asking her, a woman. Yeah?
But do you understand that it is a contextual building, that it's about the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, it's about the downtown, it's totally contextual. Its form is derived exactly from all the curvature. 100% of the curves in that building are derived from the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion.
You are actually serious?
Yes, I'm 100%, and I can,
I
can show you this.
If that is a contextual
well, wait a
building,
second.
This is not about a theoretical demonstration. This has to be phenomenologically palpable.
Argument.
I mean, I'm hearing this correctly.
This is hey, wait, let me just say, this is exactly what Patrick thinks his buildings are doing when he says they are contextual.
Yeah.
Is that right or not?
Absolutely, that's the intention, and I think our projects are doing this much more.
This is how you do it, yeah? Let me show you. This is, I'll do you a Gehry.
Did you?
Hey, did you watch the slideshow or not? Did you watch it or not? You can see the curvature.
I can see the curvature. I can see curvatures all over the place. I see curvatures in every Gehry building. And if that is a contextual building, then every context is the same.
Not true.
Well, I mean, I thought that was your opening statement.
The curvatures
deliberately
are
not
exact.
knowing anything.
Let me mediate with this. I agree with Rainier on this one. I agree with you, and I don't think it's enough to have a theoretical demonstration. It needs to be phenomenologically, perceptually palpable. But I would also at the same time say our project have the ambition to be more embedded, and I think there are more contextual embedded, and I'm happy to receive criticism if it isn't sufficiently achieved.
No one on earth thinks your projects behave in a contextual way.
I think I can. No, you have to.
Except me.
Except you.
You know. But I want to make another point. The question was about signature styles of architects, and I think they're overemphasized. We have the kind of architect's illusion that this is relevant out there in the world, and it isn't. out in the world,
You'll be
these
seeing that
things,
very
these characteristics and signature presences will be attributed to the client. The meaning of what the later means, Google Campus will be Google's invitation, space, demeanor, culture, and nobody would think of Heatherwick and Big. They're not interesting. We know these characters. But also, out in the world, a lot of these, the different architects who are working in the paradigm of paramedicine, they're diffused, they become part of one overall direction with a sense of contemporaneity. And I believe that. And I think on a subjective side, we actually don't want to be locked in the signature style. Signature styles on the subjective side is basically a constraint that we can't be versatile and light-footed enough, that we're kind of locked in by default. Certain constraints which make us recognizable, we don't like that.
So on that note, I'm sorry.
No, one more question.
We don't get to take a break.
Do you know, or have you ever seen any Peter Eisman building?
Who?
Okay, never been to one, but do you know any, like through publication or anything like that? You. Wexner Center, doesn't matter, any building at all. Do you think it's contextual? Do you know every element of every Peter Eisman building is derived from a deep reading of the context?
Can you deny this?
Can I put it back on the wall and show you? I'm sorry you haven't been taught well. Is that guy behind you your teacher?
Oh. Patrick, let me ask you as a last question.
All right, so on
How
that
can a
note.
parametric building be contextual if its processes and conceptualization is different from the context in which it's placed? How is it possible to say that parametricism will lead you to a contextual building? See, I don't. It seems
I know there is temporarily there's a certain tension.
There's a tension.
There's a tension.
Which is, I'm for that. Anyway, I'm for it, but you can't say that.
But given the fact there's a new repertoire which makes these buildings stand out more than they ultimately will and should, with these new repertoires, they try to then affiliate, be sensitive, responsive, be deflected, and informed by axes, views, volumes, trajectories, etc. But then, of course, there's a limitation. There's a tension there. Clearly.
Hey, can I say one thing about this? Do you guys know why you don't get taught proportional systems anymore? That for 400 years, from Alberti to Le Corbusier, every architect learned proportional systems and harmonic proportions, and you don't learn them. Do you know why this is? Does anybody in this room know why it is? First of all, I just want to know if anybody knows why.
I'm sure you're going to tell
Everybody
us.
up here knows.
I know why.
Well, let me ask you something. Do you know why?
They're desperately afraid to say yes.
I'm not. Do you know why?
Yeah, let's get this over with. We need a break.
Okay.
I do.
I don't want to just get this over with. I know you do, and I know you do, Peter. I want to know if you know why, or if you have a guess, or have an answer at all, anything whatsoever.
First of all, I don't agree that proportional systems are over.
Okay. But here's why. Because of construction methods and analytic methods, proportional systems make the building body-centered. It relates to itself in its part-to-whole relationships. More and more and more in the 20th century, construction systems, buildings could relate to other buildings and other relations in the context. And so more complex relationships between a building and its relationship could be made, which took it outside of its internal relationships, and that's what architecture got interested in. And this happened starting mostly in the 30s and 40s, and got particularly important in the after World War II period. So diagrammatic formalism, Schiff, Scheer, Casa del Forest, all the possibilities of a building relating to its context, producing new urban and local spaces that were learned already in place from Schinkel. I mean, it's not that it didn't happen before. These became more and more possible because building construction became more and more agile, and proportional systems fell away for two reasons. That became a possibility, buildings became more interesting, and the construction systems, the building of building components made it more and more difficult to customize proportions. And so those two things collaborated to
Well,
put.
what about parametricism as?
Well, I mean, if you don't know what happened to
production
proportional
method.
systems, then you also don't know about contextualism.
Well, what about parametricism as
Yeah,
an
you should at least
evolution
have
of
thought
proportional
about
system?
how come
What are
I'm
we
reading
talking
about proportional systems in every text I read, and I see it all the way up to modular, and no one's teaching it to me, and you're supposed to think to yourself at some point in your life, as a teacher or a student, what happened to it? Don't you think? I did. So yes, somebody's supposed to have thought about it, and it's the teachers that are supposed to be thought about it.
It goes back to Peter's question about quantum physics.
Right.
So, for example,
How's that got to do with
Sorry, Jeff.
I'm going to say it from this perspective. I think sometimes our understanding of the world is obviously based on a certain form of knowledge, and in a certain point, perspectival and all of these other human proportionally systems were the way that we sort of related to the world. Today, in a more contemporary place, scale, for example, is something that is very abstract. Money, currency. We're living in a kind of hyper-real moment where one can say that the conventions of time and space have been collapsed on it. Has become more real time, has become more instantaneous. And maybe part of the contemporary project, if there is one, is to sort of create a form of resistance to this, because in a certain way where Peter mentions that everything is disseminated and everything is everything all the time, the nature of actually how we start to construct our understandings are also changing. So it could have been a project like Powers of 10 from Eames, which was trying to talk about the infinitesimal small to the most galactical, but we're starting to realize that, we don't need science fiction today. Reality is a very radical project, and it's very difficult for us to situate ourselves into much more of this kind of contemporary form of interaction and instantaneousness. And I would say, from being maybe someone who is at the moment trying to work through these problems, that there is a lot of uncertainty and latency. And it was sort of spoke about bravado, but I think a lot of us are trying to work through these problems by understanding that there really isn't a blueprint for these things, and context is not necessarily just appearances, but we're trying to explore ideas and try to speculate on what that actually means today. So I think space is a very active medium for how we could define architecture today, but that doesn't necessitate that building is actually the answer to that problem. So there is a lot of questions that are on the table, and I hope that the conversation could expand on some of these things so that we can consider actually some of these questions. I don't necessarily think that ideas are just sort of breakthrough ideas. I think they're a continuous evolution, and seeing it through the filter of architecture also gives us, I think, greater legibility towards that, or at least in a way for you to operate within that world and take decisions. It's like my short form answer, hopefully, too.
So let's give these folks a big applause. And remember, we have a short break of about 15 minutes. Please be back here in 15 minutes. Thank you.